Some of our favorite high-scoring offenses aren't on the main slate this week. We'll tell you which offenses you can trust, and several key players are returning from injuries as well. We'll tell you which of those guys should be in your starting lineups. Welcome to the Week 6 edition of the Footballguys Daily Fantasy Power Grid, presented by DraftKings. We're going to go where we always go, welcoming back John Lee from a one-week hiatus. Speaking of people coming back from not injury, but coming back. John, tell us. What are the Vegas lines telling you this week?
Well, the most interesting game on the main slate this week is that game in Minnesota, Atlanta, Minnesota. We had some scares today. We're going to have to follow up and see what happens. A few people testing positive for COVID in Atlanta. We'll see what happens moving forward. We're going to pretend, at least for tonight's discussion, that this game is still in play. 54-point total. Minnesota home favorite. 4-point home favorite. No Dalvin Cook, so Alexander Mattison chalk. I guess maybe we're eating it, maybe we're not. We'll find out in the running back section. The Detroit Lions are the second highest implied team total on the board this week, going up against Jacksonville down in Florida. That game has shootout potential as well, 54.5 points as of Thursday night. And we just go down the line. Tennessee at Houston, 53 points. You got Green Bay, Tampa Bay. What is the guy on ESPN, what's he call that? The battle, the Bay of the Pigs, or the Pig of the Bay, or Tampa Bay.
The Battle of the
Bays? What is it called? No. He calls it something, the Bay of Pigs, I think, every year. Yeah, thank you. That game's 55 points. There's a lot of games. The point is there are quite a few games this week that have implied team totals or game totals above 50, 52, 53 points. And we're going to talk about game stacking. I know my list here is all game stacks tonight when we get to that section. A lot of interesting things because as you led with, Kansas City's not on the main slate. You know, we've got a lot of great teams who aren't on the main slate this week. Where are we going to go? And that's where the next, 55 minutes are going to take us.
Yes, exactly. And I saw Devin get in a early red black-eyed Joe saying he's not buying. It sounds like he's not buying that Detroit Jacksonville high total. Devin, let's move on to quarterbacks, and maybe you can tell me, hey, Matthew Stafford, not a play for you this week?
Are we ever playing Matthew Stafford?
A fair question.
Like, is anyone ever excited that, I'm plugging Matthew Stafford into my lineup? I mean, look, Jacksonville is like a decent matchup. It's an above-average matchup. It's not a matchup that you absolutely have to start Matthew Stafford against. I mean, looking at Jacksonville on the season, Deshaun Watson tore them up, but how much of that was in the fourth quarter last week? Twitter was all about how bad Watson looked for the first three quarters of that game. Joe Burrow had 300 yards and a touchdown. Ryan Fitzpatrick had his worst game of the season, but it was a low-volume performance. But long story short, I mean, Matthew Stafford, maybe someone else can do it, but he just doesn't move the needle for me. I'm sorry. He's not that high volume guy that he was in past years. To me, it's a tough week, and maybe that's why people are liking Stafford. But I kind of like Ryan Fitzpatrick this week, going up against the Jets at home. What do the Jets have to play for at this point? I mean, they were a little bit motivated early on in the season. But now they've cut Le'Veon Bell. The writing's on the wall that they're going pretty much all in for Trevor Lawrence. You know, not guaranteeing Darnold's role after this season. Kyler Murray threw for 380 yards last week, and this is a team that has faced Josh Allen, Jimmy Garoppolo, an aging Phillip Rivers, Brett Rippon, and now Kyler Murray. They haven't faced anybody, and this is a game where Ryan Fitzpatrick could have a Fitzmagic game.
I like the Fitzmagic pick. The Bills fans are going to be upset that you didn't.
No singing tonight? What the hell? What's going on? Fitzmagic?
You
go away for a week and you take away the spark on the entire show?
Yeah.
You without you, John, there was no muse, and so it's hard to get that back. You know,
it was the day that the music died.
You bring Ryan back. This is what happens. The show goes downhill, but I'm back. So,
all right, we'll have to work back
American
up.
Pie.
Phil, tell me, who do you like at quarterback this week?
Yeah, I'll agree on Fitzpatrick. Definitely, I think an obvious cash game play, at least 25 DraftKings points in each of his last 4 games. So very quietly and surprisingly a high floor option at this stage of his career.
Quietly, I've been screaming it all week, all year.
I guess you've even been singing it all year. Um, I don't mind Deshaun Watson if I'm going to pay up at quarterback. It's a little bit more of a GPP play, but I think that the Titans are on a short week. They just played on Tuesday night, and they might have expended a whole lot of energy. It seems like they were worked up to kind of stick it to everyone who was mad at them for breaking COVID protocols. And, they came out with a big performance against Buffalo. But before that, they had allowed 60 points over their last 2 games to the Jacksonville and Minnesota offenses. And it's definitely like some sort of bias, but I could remember Deshaun Watson having really big games against the Titans in the past. He's done it quite a few times. So I think there could be a lot of scoring in that game. Don't mind it. And then kind of, I'm not sure if it's purely a GPP play, and I'll toss it up to you guys. Ryan Tannehill's coming off of a 30-point game. He gets this Houston defense, which is not very good. It seems to me like his wide receiver and his wide receiver one and tight end are going to be quite popular, but I don't know if people are going to be playing him as much. So I'm curious, what do you guys think? In terms of roster percentages, where does he clock in?
Yeah, John, what do you think of that? I think Fitzpatrick's going to be the more highly rostered player than Tannehill, but they're both in the same price point on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Is that some sort of a potential GPP pivot, or is that
Tannehill at 9.4%?
9.4?
Yeah. He stole it from me. I would have said 8 to 10.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a little higher than I would hope for a 1-to-1 pivot.
Yeah.
That's pretty popular. So I'll throw one more GPP quarterback out there before I give up the mic. I think Cam Newton has been out of sight, out of mind, and you've got New England in a spot where they're an 8.5-point favorite at home. The implied total there is 27 points. Cam Newton was playing some of his best football, participating in 60% of the Patriots' total touchdowns this season. So if they're going to score 27 points, I think that he has the potential for 3 touchdowns, whether they come through the air or on the ground. Denver's pass defense might not be as bad as like Miami and Seattle, who Newton beat up on earlier this season, but they've allowed multiple passing touchdowns in every game they've played, with the exception of the one that was against Sam Darnold and Joe Flacco. So I think that Cam Newton, assuming that he goes overlooked just because we haven't seen him in a while, I think he could be a good play in GPPs with a high ceiling.
And for those of you who are hoping to see Jared Stidham take on Brett Rippon in that game, it's probably going to be Cam Newton versus Drew Lock this week. It looks like both of them are coming back this week. And I think that Cam Newton is going to be one of those more popular guys coming back this week. John, I saw you raise the yellow black-eyed Joe for both Cam Newton and Ryan Fitzpatrick. Which of those guys do you like more in cash, or do you have another guy you like even more than those guys?
Those are the 2 guys I've written down as of Thursday night. Of course, I always tell listeners, viewers to check out my article on Saturday, because that's where my final analysis comes into play. But those are the 2 guys I've earmarked as cash game plays as of Thursday night. Of the 2, I think I prefer Fitzpatrick simply because he comes at a discount, and the matchup, as the guys have already talked about, is golden. I really like it. I do think that Newton is going to be interesting. We're just now starting to get kind of the percent rostered numbers on Thursday night, and they really do mature Friday and into Saturday and even overnight into Sunday morning. And that'll really land, kind of dictate where I land with regards to Cam Newton and exposure in GPPs. But right now, I'm going to put you on the spot, Devin. Where do you have Cam Newton? Because I think he's going to be pretty low, at least to start the week off, in terms of recency bias and that kind of thing. I'm guessing 4% to 6%.
6% on DraftKings.
Yeah,
I'll take that.
And that, based on my numbers, he's the 3rd highest quarterback to most likely to reach GPP value this week. And that 6% number that Devin is quoting is probably, I'm guessing, somewhere around 12th to 15th out of all the quarterbacks. So there's a lot of value to be had there with regards to Cam Newton. He's a guy that I like in cash games and certainly in GPPs if he stays at that level.
I would say that he's probably the candidate that could rise the most.
For sure.
So he could get to 12 to 15% very easily.
And that's the downside of recording when we do. As of yesterday, as Austin said, it was going to be Stidham for as a starter, and now that people are getting used to Newton, they're going to start looking at the numbers, and we're going to see that rise, and ultimately that may lessen my enthusiasm about playing him in GPPs. But I think if you're around 10%, that's probably reasonable. If he gets above that, then you want to drop off of him a little bit.
And we record Thursday nights, just to be clear, Thursday nights. So like that earlier statement that John made about Falcons positive tests coming in, those came in Thursday morning. And so that game is still on track as of now, but the Falcons game you're going to want to keep an eye on. Yes, John, who else you got?
Yeah, I was just going to mention one GPP play this week in terms of quarterbacks. The guy that I like this week, well, there's a couple, but I'll just talk about one. I think Gardner Minshew in that Detroit game is interesting. Detroit has allowed 3 out of 5. I pulled it up really quickly. I think 3 out of 5 quarterbacks that they've faced this season to throw for 300 yards. That's not right, John. That's not what I have. Well, right. I'm at a loss. That's what my notes say, but I just pulled it up, and that's not true. So that's not right. Don't say that, John.
Blow him up in the Twitter comments.
I'll take
or YouTube comments.
I'll take it back a notch and say that they've not allowed less than 2 touchdowns to opposing quarterbacks all season. Mitch Trubisky threw for 3 against this same Detroit Lions defense in week 1. Drew Brees threw a couple last week. Kyler Murray went for 3 the week prior. Aaron Rodgers went for a pair. And whether or not Devin likes it, we look at Vegas. Vegas is telling us this is the second highest Vegas total on the entire board. And if Detroit jumps out to a lead, we know Detroit doesn't love their running back. So from my perspective, Minshew is a guy that we should be looking at. And I just now realized, shorthand of my notes, Minshew himself has thrown for 300 yards in 3 out of 5 games. Not Detroit has allowed. So this is what happens when you're old-fashioned. You actually write your notes.
Is that paper?
That's paper.
Wow.
No Excel spreadsheets until the weekend. It's all handwritten. This is what happens when you're an old man, Austin. You'll get there in like next year.
Just take the under in that game and just ignore the rest of it.
Devin, you got any other quarterback picks before we move on to running backs?
Ben Roethlisberger at 1% rostered is pretty interesting. Going up against a Cleveland defense that has largely been hit or miss. They've actually been one of the best defenses against the run all season, but against the pass, they've allowed some pretty big games. I mean, the 500 yards to Dak Prescott was the outlier, but 300 yards, 316 to Joe Burrow and 275 to Lamar Jackson. Greedy Williams and Denzel Ward just can't stay healthy. So I think that this is a game in which, especially if Deontay Johnson is back, I think that it's a game in which Roethlisberger at 1% rostered is at least intriguing to have 300-yard upside.
Hit us up in the YouTube comments. I'm curious who you, the listeners, think is the chalk this week. I want to hear who you think is the most popular plays, so we can talk about that a little bit in the YouTube comments. And please give us a little thumbs up on the YouTube video here. All right, running backs. We're going to come to you, Phil, first, but let's talk about the injuries here. We saw Dalvin Cook does not look like he's going to play this week. He didn't practice Thursday. I really doubt he's going to play. That means we could be Alexander Mattison chalk week. He's not throwing away his shot. And then Melvin Gordon is got in a little trouble on Tuesday night, although he did get in a full practice on Thursday. So it's going to be a little interesting to see if that affects the Denver backfield at all this week. Maybe he sits at a series or two. Maybe he sits a quarter to start the game. Who knows? I don't know that it matters a ton. Phil, tell me, who are the running backs you like this week?
Hey, I'm going to throw a question back to you. Could you remind me of the name of the tool that you do on the site?
Oh,
That
normalized strength of schedule.
not that one. That one's great and one of my favorites, but the one that compares the pricing across sites.
We discontinued it this year. It used to be called the
Evaluator.
evaluator tool. It used to allow you to compare the pricing from site to site and point out weird pricing anomalies on certain sites.
Okay, egg on my face. The reason that I brought it up though
Sure.
is because Alexander Mattison, DraftKings really priced him up. Nice job by them making him 7,200 in this matchup, and I don't know if I could do it at 7,200. Whereas on FanDuel, it looks like he was down much lower, and his price is far more palatable.
He's
On
7,000 on FanDuel.
On Yahoo, he's $14 and is going to be about 75% rostered.
Oh wow,
Yeah, 100% in my rosters.
Yeah.
Assuming that game's played.
yeah. So I don't know if I'm crazy about him on DraftKings. I think that if I was playing cash games, the first guy that I'd lock in is Derrick Henry. You got Tennessee at home, 5.5-point favorite, 28-point total. The matchup with the Texans, they allow the sixth most DraftKings points to enemy running backs. And it's had very little to do with the PPR scoring on DraftKings. You got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 138 rushing yards and a touchdown. James Conner, 109 rushing yards and a touchdown. And then Dalvin Cook went for 130 and 2. So teams are getting it done on the ground against the Texans, and that is Henry's specialty. And he's got the established ceiling that we're looking for really in any format. If you look back at his last 12 games, he's gone over the 4x multiple of his current salary in a third of those games. And that is probably right around where his ownership or roster percentage is going to come in. And it might actually be a little bit above that. So he might actually be more likely to go for 4x than even his chalkiness would imply. So I got Derrick Henry for cash games, and then there's quite a few guys I got here for GPPs, but I'll give you one and then see where the rest of the guys go. It's been really tiresome losing money waiting on this Jonathan Taylor breakout game. I keep going over the field on Jonathan Taylor and telling people to do it, and it's just not happening. They don't seem to want to commit to him for more than like 60% of the snaps. The pass game work he got way back in week 1 hasn't been there. But we've been talking all year about the Cincinnati linebackers and how inexperienced they are and how you want to target running backs against them. And now not only do we have that, but their defensive line has been wrecked. You've got Sam Hubbard, who's their most reliable defensive end. He's out with an elbow injury. DJ Reader, their nose tackle, went out for the year. He's their third defensive tackle to land on IR. If there's ever a week where I think that the Colts are going to want to hide Phillip Rivers after he kind of handed the game to the Browns last week, I think it would be this week. And I think that the game script and the game plan should feature a lot of Jonathan Taylor. And I think this could be the week that he goes over 100 with multiple touchdowns. And he should not be too highly rostered because he's let everyone down so often in the last couple of weeks. But I'd love to hear Devin's take on that since he went red pretty quickly.
No, go to John. I have a nice background for when my turn is coming up.
Okay, let's talk, John. Let's talk running backs. It's tough to avoid Alexander Mattison even at that high price on DraftKings just because they're going up against the Falcons here. I mean, is the firing of head coach Dan Quinn suddenly going to get that defense fired up to stop the run? What do you think, John?
No, this is an offense that likes to run the ball first.
Yeah.
Mattison, I'm quite okay with. What is he doing?
This is an intervention.
How I Met Your Mother intervention.
Phil
Do you
needs
want to,
to come.
do you want to intervene now, or do
Yes.
you want to? Okay, go ahead. You intervene.
Phil, we need to have a talk, buddy. I can't keep letting you lose all your money on Jonathan Taylor. You have kids. Think of the children. He's just not getting the volume. I mean, that's the biggest issue with him, and what's going to change. So I think there's other running backs in this spot, but I'll turn it back over to John, and then I'll jump back in.
We got to get Devin quicker on the Google search engine to get
I'm
those
trying
pictures
here.
downloaded.
I think he's using Ask Jeeves to find those backgrounds. John, tell us more about the running backs you like.
Yeah, the running backs I like, excuse me, for cash games this week, I think there's 3 as of tonight. I always qualify that because, additional research, but I do feel pretty confident about the 3 that are on my list. I've actually got 4, but one of them is my least favorite. I think David Montgomery in Chicago is interesting this week. He's going up against Carolina. No team in the league has allowed more fantasy points to opposing running backs than Carolina, and he's super cheap at 5,800. And he's been used pretty heavily since Tariq Cohen went down a couple weeks ago. He provides a little bit of salary relief when we start talking about going with a guy like Derrick Henry, who on DraftKings is 7,300, and Mattison at 7,200. I do agree there are better places to go with him at FanDuel and Yahoo, but still at 7,200. I've got him as the 3rd best value on the board. Actually, he's tied for Derrick Henry in terms of the projections that I've got in front of me at the moment. So this week, that's probably going to be the core of my cash game lineups. We're going to talk a little bit about wide receivers and how we feel about that, and how tight end is an absolute dreadful wasteland this week. So if I'm spending up this week, it's going to be in a position where I feel pretty comfortable, and that's running back. So those 3, the 4th one, and I guess I'll throw it back to everybody else, and then I can maybe come back with a GPP pick or not, or 2. Mike Davis going up in that same game against Chicago, 7,000, comes up pretty high on my ratings, but of the I guess the 4 people that I mentioned, he's my least favorite going up against Chicago, particularly because his price has gotten to a point now that I'm not so confident rolling him out there at a $7,000 price point, especially when we go up, when we think of it for $200 or $300 more. I can have Henry or Mattison, who I think are superior talented backs to Davis.
Devin, I saw you kind of nodding your head there on Mike Davis. How do you feel about him?
I like him quite a bit. I mean, if I just look at his involvement in the pass game, it's really Christian McCaffrey-esque. I mean, he has 21 receptions in his last 3 games. So, the floor there from a cash game perspective, I think is higher than Mattison, as weird as that sounds, just because of the pass game involvement. His ceiling may not be as high as a guy like Mattison, but to have almost a guaranteed touchdown to start based off of the receptions volume is a nice way to start your week. Looking down the list a little bit, James Robinson I can't get away from, so maybe I need an intervention. But he's actually been good at football instead of Jonathan Taylor. He disappointed last week, so I think his roster percentage is going to fall a little bit. But this is Detroit. We talked about this game a little bit earlier and how points are going to be scored. Detroit, I mean, in week 2 they allowed 231 yards to Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, and then last week they allowed 147 and 3 touchdowns to Latavius Murray and Alvin Kamara. I think that James Robinson at 6,800 is going to be vastly overlooked, less than 5 to 6%. So he's a guy that I'm looking at pretty heavily. And then going down the list a little bit. I don't know.
He's regretting it already. He hasn't even said he's regretting it.
Yeah, Myles Gaskin at 5,400 is intriguing. I want all of Miami against this Jets team. I just don't believe in them, but I don't love the player, to be honest. I think that Gaskin is heavily overrated, but even he's not really that highly rated. So yeah.
I was really hoping Le'Veon Bell would end up there and we wouldn't have to do Myles Gaskin anymore. If I could, I got 2 more for GPPs.
Do it.
So I guess one general point that I want to make is that I think if you want to get unique at running back this week, you're going to want to go with good players in perceived poor matchups. And a couple of those guys that stand out to me, One is Kareem Hunt, who should be moderately popular, but I loved his usage last week when there were some questions about the split with Ernest Johnson, and you saw Hunt get 70% of the snaps in the backfield touches, and he might have had more if that game was closer. He'll get shaded a little bit by the matchup with Pittsburgh, but this is probably a top 5 running back in the league, and he's priced below 7K on DraftKings. I'll take that. And then the other one, an even worse matchup, is Joe Mixon. But I think that Joe Mixon, what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, is what many envisioned for him in the preseason. And that was what's been happening. 95% of the backfield touches in Cincinnati over the last 2 weeks. He's coming off a 30-touch game in a 24-point loss that included 6 receptions. So I think that in the event that Cincinnati goes down big, which is likely in this game with the Colts, I think Mixon will stay involved. He's the engine of that offense, and I think he'll come in way under Hunt. So again, pure GPP play there, but I think you always want to consider those workhorses where that volume is locked in, and the crowd's only giving them, let's say, a 3 or 5% chance. Well, anytime a guy's touching the ball that much, there's more than a 3 or 5% chance that he's going to deliver, especially when they're talented players like Mixon and Hunt.
Yeah, I think that's a good general piece of advice in GPPs, going over the field with guys in bad matchups like that. John, you got any other guys you want to throw out before we move on?
Maybe I'll throw out one confirmation and one additional person. So I do like the Myles Gaskin call. He's getting a lot of, especially in DraftKings full PPR format, he's getting quite a few catches out of the backfield there. And the matchup against the Jets, I mean, the Jets are mailing it in. I think the Le'Veon Bell release is just going to be the icing on the cake. Let's watch that team just fall apart. Take advantage of Miami as a 9-point home favorite, and I think Gaskin gets 20 plus touches at a fairly decent price of 5,400. The one name that wasn't mentioned, and he's been pretty quiet in terms of touchdowns the last couple of weeks, is David Johnson going up against Tennessee. Tennessee's 27th DVOA against the rush. Haven't done a whole lot. I think they're allowing close to 6 yards a carry this season. And Johnson, Duke Johnson, his counterpart, came back a couple weeks ago, and people were worried about him really eating into touches on David Johnson, but it hasn't happened. He's got 18 and 19 touches in the past 2 weeks. He hasn't found the end zone, and so for that reason, I think a lot of people are going to be shying away from him. But I think he's an interesting GPP selection moving into the weekend.
And hasn't was it Romeo Crennel, the interim coach, is saying like, hey, maybe we'll give Duke Johnson some more work, but we kind of have yet to see it. So it may just be coach speak,
Yep, that's right.
The problem with David Johnson is just the lack of reception. So if those come, he can really turn it around. But I don't think he has more than 2 in a game.
Yeah,
I think you're right. He's had 3 in week 1. Oh. That said, he's 5,400. I don't know that he needs the receptions. Yeah. He needs the touchdowns, and that's what's been missing.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about wide receivers. John, we're going to come back to you first on wide receivers. But before that, please subscribe to our channel. Hit that bell so that you get notifications whenever we release a new video. We've got the Audible guys do great shows, in-depth analysis of what's going on around the league. And then, of course, you'll get notified whenever this DFS show lands each week. John, we're looking at wide receivers. We've got a couple of key receivers that are likely to return this week in Davante Adams and Chris Godwin. Both of them are practicing this week. Keep an eye on them. It looks like Adams is pretty much a sure thing for this week. Godwin a little iffier. And then we got a couple other guys we're keeping an eye on. DJ Chark did not practice on Thursday, and Deontay Johnson got a limited practice on Thursday. So, John, who do you like at wide receiver?
I'll always start with cash. I think in terms of cash games this week, in that mid 5K range, there are 2 guys I'm looking at. Terry McLaurin makes a lot of sense. He's coming off of kind of a disappointing week, but the numbers are really stacking up for him this week against the Giants. This is a game that they could potentially win if they get a little bit of quarterback play. And McLaurin is at a point where I truly believe he doesn't like that call.
Yeah, Devin has flashed up the red black guy Joe. He hates your first call. Way to go, John.
No, I think he probably hated the call that I said they could actually win this game. Is that right?
No, I don't like McLaurin this week.
Okay, well, that's a bad take on you. Let me finish out, and then you can tell me why you're wrong. McLaurin is a perfectly good play this week at 5,700. In fact, I think he might be. Let me just double check on that before I say it. He is the highest rated player on my board this week, and if he's not in the top 3 in terms of GPPs, then you should be playing him pretty heavy there as well. At that same price point, though, and maybe Devin will like this one a bit more. AJ Brown looked the part when he came back earlier this week. That team, he looks like he's in a great spot. This week he goes up against Houston. We've already been talking about this game a couple times. So they're 5,700 and 5,600 respectively on DraftKings. Take your pick. If you don't like one, you go with the other. I'm not sure you can have both. Especially if you're building around the core I talked about at running back. With those 2 7K running backs, you're going to have to find a place to go down. And for me this week, that's probably going to be Demir Byrd going up against Denver, 3,500 with Cam Newton back. I feel like he's kind of finding his place there. There is another 3K guy I like, but I'll save that for potentially in the GPP section.
So Devin hates all your picks, so let's go to him next.
Yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
I do. The problem with McLaurin for me is Alex Smith, and having an inexperienced quarterback sometimes can lock onto a receiver, which we saw with Dwayne Haskins. These two were college roommates. My concern with McLaurin and Cash is whether Smith is a veteran quarterback just gonna spread the ball out a little bit more, and therefore McLaurin's volume is gonna drop like we saw last week. So that's my concern with him. Demir Byrd, I like Jeff Smith more with the Jets at 3K. What does he have? 18 targets in the last two games. He hasn't done much with them, but
to be fair, he was the other guy I was going to mention. So if you want to pivot off of Demir Byrd, Jeff Smith is just fine from my angle.
If I'm going down that low, I'm going all the way down. I'm taking the extra 500 and calling it a day.
From my perspective, I'm sorry because it's relevant at this point in time. The Jets have a 19-point implied team total, and New England is upwards of almost 28 points, and that for me that's the differentiation. I know you're calling out the 5-point difference in terms of, or $500 difference in terms of that, but for me it's I think the upside is higher as well.
And just for clarity, I get the sense that Kyle Allen's going to be starting for the Washington football team this week.
Is he?
That's what I'm seeing in the latest news, but again, keep an eye on that. It's like apparently he missed a little bit of the end of the game there, but it sounds like he's going to be okay. There was just a cautionary removal. I don't know.
So captain dump off to the running back. Don't know that I like McLaurin in that scenario.
Yeah,
either.
I'm not saying it changes McLaurin's situation.
Yeah.
I think it's Kyle Allen this week.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me like the running backs a little bit more there. So looking down, what are we doing with some of these guys that busted on the scene last week, like Fulgham or Claypool or any of these guys that are the hot commodity? Are we touching them?
I think Phil and I are going to disagree on one of those, and then the other one we'll talk about. Go ahead, Phil.
Sure. With Claypool, I don't know. If Deontay Johnson sits, I think he's going to get pretty popular. And at that point, I don't know that I'm interested. This is he's never going to score 4 touchdowns in a game again, probably for the rest of his career. So, if it happens that Deontay Johnson is out and everybody jumps on him, I think I would rather pay up to Juju Smith-Schuster in that spot because Cleveland struggles against the slot receiver more so than the perimeter receivers. I think I'd go that route. And the other one was Fulgham.
Yeah,
I actually like him better than Claypool. I think that he's more of a, he's the locked in X receiver there. I think he's going to be on the field for every snap. I think he's going to run all of the routes on Carson Wentz's dropbacks. He's inexpensive. He's got a tough matchup right? I mean, we don't usually love testing Baltimore's perimeter corners, but I think he could. I think he showed really well. He's got an intriguing athletic profile. I think he could be fine for the price.
I think the issue. Okay, so I'm not playing Claypool. The guy didn't have one red zone target and scored 4 touchdowns. If there's ever a time for regression,
He didn't need to.
Yeah, well, obviously he won every. He was a sleep breaker, but do not play him. His price has gone up. Blame me if he blows up again and you don't have him. Fulgham's a guy that I'm interested in, but only if Alshon Jeffrey doesn't play. Jeffrey he's practicing, right? And there's a possibility he's coming back this week.
He got in a limited practice on Wednesday and on Thursday. But look, this would be his season. This is Alshon Jeffrey. It would be his season debut.
I'm not saying I like Jeffrey. I'm just
no,
saying
I understand.
I
just don't know that he's going to have an impact. Like, I don't know that he's going to play like a third of the snaps. And I think it's probably not going to happen this week.
Well, look, any of the 4 of us could line up opposites JJ Whiteside Ortega right now and get about 3 or 4 targets. Any of us. So that's what I'm worried about, is just market share, target share, whatever you want to call it. If Alshon gets out there, he's going to steal targets away from the only 2 people on the team that can catch the ball off the side, and that's Fulgham and Ertz, and we'll talk about Ertz in a minute. But if Jeffrey comes back, then he's a big downgrade for me.
Okay. And then 3 other guys that I just want to touch on really quickly. If Odell Beckham misses, I think Jarvis Landry is going to get 12 to 13 targets probably. Probably not high value targets, but at 4,900 he's at least cash game viable. Odell Beckham left practice on Thursday with a weird personal illness. They didn't release anything else besides that, so there's speculation it's COVID. But who knows? It could just be him partying too much. Celebrating the win still. Brandon Cooks is interesting in a GPP. They didn't move his price up nearly as much as they should have. He's only $5K in a favorable matchup against Tennessee. And then the last guy that I'll throw out, a deep sleeper, Laviska Shenault. The game is coming. I don't know when, but he's becoming more and more involved in this offense. A lot of hype on him very early in the season. It sometimes takes some of these guys a little bit of time. But he's been producing the last several weeks and going up against the Lions. It's a good matchup, but he's had 20 targets in the last 3 weeks.
John, I want to kick it back to you because there's a lot of guys that are near the top of our lineup builders that did not get mentioned, and I don't know if it's just because you guys all dislike them or if it's like the builds just aren't working this week to fit in these guys' salaries, maybe because you're paying up at running back. But like, I'm not hearing Kenny Golladay in a matchup against Jacksonville. I'm not hearing Adam Thielen in a matchup against Atlanta, or Robbie Anderson, who's been getting a lot of action in Carolina. Any of those guys interest you this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that interests me the most is Adam Thielen. He's the one that actually did make my cash game list. He's the only one that I didn't talk about when I led off the segment. So he's certainly in play. And look, Golladay he's in my opinion, he's one of the better receivers in the league. He's only 6,200, so he's certainly in play as well. But
don't take right. Matt Stafford wide receivers.
Wait, what
There's
about
only one?
Don't take Matt Stafford wide receivers.
Huh.
Well,
all Galladay's done is be injured and score touchdowns in every game that he's played this year. I think people might be underrating the fact that they're coming off a bye. Golladay is going to be as healthy as he's been all season because he hurt himself right at the end of the preseason. Prior to week 1. And I think that bye week, coupled with the fact that the vertical element in that passing game has been missing, I think the extra week of practice might have given them the time to reincorporate what was working so well last year. And I think Golladay has as much touchdown upside as any wide receiver on the slate. The cornerbacks that he's slated to face in Jacksonville, their first-round rookie, C.J. Henderson, is iffy with a shoulder issue. He missed last week. And then his backup, who is responsible for Brandon Cooks' going off last week. Chris Claybrooks, he's dealing with a quadriceps injury. He might not even play. So that guy is the guy that Brandon Cook smoked, and his backup is going to be covering Kenny Golladay on some routes. I'm excited to play Golladay. And on the topic of Adam Thielen, I'm a little bit concerned about that Minnesota passing game. I mentioned it last week when we were talking about Daniel Jones as a cash game option. And I said, if you look at the quality of their offensive line and you look at how often Dallas is able to generate a pass rush, there was a mismatch there. And even though Atlanta's defense absolutely stinks, just like Dallas's does, they could pressure the quarterback too. They get there at like a 30, I think it's a 33% rate, which is the sixth highest in the league. So if those downfield plays aren't there for Thielen, who really isn't a yards after the catch guy, I think we could be looking at just kind of like a volume-based average day. And at high roster rates, I think I'd rather try Justin Jefferson, who has a little bit more juice after the catch. I could more easily picture him getting open and racing downfield than I can with Adam Thielen in that matchup.
What are their respective ADOTs? Do you know that off the top of your head? Seems like you know all the other numbers, so I'm not afraid to ask.
Jefferson's is actually a little bit higher even than Thielen's.
So with that in mind, why wouldn't Thielen be the guy that you'd be looking at if they're getting a pass rush in on him, on Cousins?
Because I think it could change. I think Thielen is more of like the catch it and fall down guy.
Yeah.
Which is not going to help him hit his ceiling, whereas Jefferson is an explosive athlete. And if they do, especially with Dalvin Cook gone, maybe they get him one or two of those looks where they try to get him in space. I don't know. I just think at the roster rates, I think I would rather go with the explosive guy who's coming off a bad game, who's pretty cheap.
Just play Robbie Anderson.
Devin likes Robbie Anderson. In cash,
I mean, how can you not? He's safe, and people don't view him as safe. But that's a whole nother.
Well, they're used to his boomer bust play on the Jets, right? They're not used to the new, more consistent Robbie Anderson.
He's back with his college coach, and he's performing in a big way.
Yeah. Okay, so I feel like we're a little all over the place for our cash game picks in this section. We were a little closer together in the other sections. Let's help our viewers recap here on cash. Let's go around the horn here. John, your cash guys are who again? Your top two, maybe?
Warren and AJ Brown.
Okay.
That's just incorrect.
Thielen.
Okay.
I mean, Devin. We can never do this because Devin's always going to interrupt. Brown and McLaurin, Thielen, and then on the low end, I did say Bird, but I'm okay with Devin's suggestion of Jeff Smith.
Okay.
So you got to mix them up because otherwise you're not going to be able to fit them all in.
Right. Okay. So going to Devin, you said Jeff Smith here.
Jeff Smith, Robbie Anderson, and I'm going to give Fulgham a shot if Alshon Jeffrey's out.
Okay. And then what do you think, Phil? I know you're mostly the GPP guy, but who are like a couple guys you feel safe with?
I agree with AJ Brown. I like Kenny Golladay for cash. And if I was coming all the way down to the Bird Jeff Smith level, I wouldn't mind going back to Olomide Zaccheaus if Julio Jones scratches again. Because I think with Jeff Smith, I think we might see Brashad Perryman finally back this week. And I think that might change the dynamic that was seeing him get heavily targeted for whatever Joe Flacco targets are worth anyway.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone's going to be looking to play Julio Jones, but him missing does change the dynamics of the entire Falcons pass catchers. That's a good point. All right, check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS. Let's talk about tight ends. Devin, why don't we come to you first on tight ends? The one injury I'm watching is Noah Fant. He got a limited practice in on Thursday with an ankle injury. He could be back this week, but it's a little iffy. Devin, tell us what you got.
Do we have to talk about this position?
It's rough, man. It's rough. I hear you. Like none of your takes in this position are going to feel great, right?
I mean, Jonnu Smith is probably the safest, but I'm not going there. I just don't. Yeah, I'm not doing it. I'm actually going Zach Ertz. $5,000. against Baltimore. Baltimore, their corners are really good, but they allowed 50 yards. Is this right? 50 yards and a touchdown to David and Njoku in week 1. Jordan Akins had 55 yards. Travis Kelce had 87 yards. I think Ertz is on the closer to Kelce than he is in Njoku. So I think that it could be an Ertz game this week, especially if the wide receivers do struggle. If Alshon Jeffrey plays, that actually helps Zach Ertz quite a bit. So at 5K, I like him a lot. I don't like any of these other guys.
That's fine. That's fine. What do you think, Phil? Yeah, what do you think, Phil? Is there any guy you're reaching, like going really low on price or digging deep to find?
Yeah, if I was going really low on price, and I think that's something that I would want to do in a cash game, given the state of the position this week, Irv Smith is the site minimum, and he was finally involved in the passing game last week. We've been waiting for it all season. He ran 31 pass routes, and typically 30 is that line that you look for quality tight end usage in the passing game. So he got there. He went for 4 catches and 64 yards. He does that again this week. There's your 4x value, and it should help that Atlanta is the team that gave up the big Bob Tonyan game the other night with 3 touchdowns. They got clobbered by Jimmy Graham. Dalton Schultz had a big game. So this is obviously a defense that a tight end could get over on. So if I'm going way low, it's Irv Smith. And you actually mentioned my one GPP guy, and he's super risky because of what you said, Austin, about the injury, is Noah Fant. I think at 5,400, if he suits up, and obviously you're going to have to stay pretty glued to the news cycle, check out what Dr. Gene has to say about how effective he could be on that ankle. But I feel like you're getting Drew Lock's wide receiver 1 for 5,400 in that game if Noah Fant plays. And prior to that ankle sprain in week 4, Fant, he was having the second-year breakout. He was the tight end 4 in cumulative DraftKings tight end scoring through the first 4 games. So I think if he's active, he's someone that you have to consider. He's got a high ceiling.
The Falcons definitely lose track of the tight ends on defense. John, who you like at tight end?
I don't like anybody, for what it's worth.
Sure.
I think
you have to pick some, though.
Do I?
You do.
Yeah. So Zach Ertz is on my list. I think I didn't hear anybody say Jonnu Smith, which I was kind of surprised about. The guy has 2 touchdowns in I think 2 of the last 3 games.
Devin mentioned him, but was like,
okay.
He's just boring.
I mean, they're all boring this week, right? I mean, it's a week where Kittle and Kelce are not on the main slate, so you don't have Waller on the main slate. It's all the guys we love to go after. They're not here, and actually that makes for some really interesting game strategies. You start to think about how to construct your lineups. If the best tight end on the slate is Jonnu Smith or Zach Ertz, then all of a sudden there are some interesting things to do, and we're talking about guys like, to use Phil's term, Bob Tonyan. It's like he's a buddy with him, Bob Tonyan. I guess the one guy I'll call out for GPPs, Trey Burton, is interesting to me. He's 3,100. He's a guy that's getting more and more looks in that offense. And if you watched that game last week with Phillip Rivers under center, he's actually I was surprised at how bad he looks. He's got nothing on his arm. He's got nothing anywhere. The tight end is about as far of the distance he's going to be able to throw. And Trey Burton, actually, I think he had some, I won't call them great stats, but some decent stats. He's improving in terms of snap count and touches per week. He came back. He had 2 catches his first week. He had 5 catches last week. I wouldn't be surprised to see him collect 6 to 8 this week at a 3,100 price point. So he's the guy I'll be looking at 3,100 in DraftKings for a GPP like selection.
Any other guidance?
Eric Ebron is interesting against Cleveland, 4,100.
I'll throw Hayden Hurst into the player pool too. I think if they keep giving him 6 to 8 targets, eventually he'll do something with them. He's out there. He's running routes, getting targets.
And I think targets than Zacchaeus, but yeah. Looking at FanDuel, I think that if you can spend up and get Mark Andrews, but he's 7,600.
Pricey.
Yeah,
Pricey.
and the Eagles are pretty bad. The Eagles are pretty bad against tight ends. I think I had noted they're fourth worst in terms of fantasy points per game allowed, and we know that Andrews is pretty much the number one target there in Baltimore.
Will he be the highest rostered guy? I feel like he'll be close.
On FanDuel, he will be because he's so touchdown heavy.
Yeah.
Not so sure about DraftKings.
He'll be up there. I think a lot of people just say, I'm not doing any of this. And I have him at 13% on DraftKings and 25% on FanDuel for what it's worth.
I think Jonnu and Ertz probably are right there with him. But suffice it to say, we led in with this. We'll go out with it. You can pretty much play any tight end you want this week, and you're not going to feel good about it.
Get one of those big wheels and just spin it.
We offered better advice than just spinning a wheel. I mean, here's the other thing. If we mention a lot of guys in a section, this is for you guys, the viewers. Keep in mind that the first folks that we mention are some of the safer plays, the guys that are usually like cash plays or at the higher on our GPP list. But for those of us that are playing mass multi-enter, we're going to diversify across a lot of tight ends, right? So mentioning several guys here isn't sort of diluting our advice. It's more saying like you need to diversify your tight end exposure if you are going to, mass multi-enter. Is that a fair statement, John?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think I haven't made out my pool yet, but I suspect I'm going to have about a dozen to 12 to 14 tight ends in my player pool this week, and that's across 150 lineups. So, if you're entering 50, then divide that by 3, and you've got 4 to 5 or thereabouts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Wherever the wheel lands, that's who you got to take.
Real quick, something's eating at me. What is boring about Jonnu Smith, Devin? The guy runs like a running back when he's got the ball in his hands. He's awesome. He's one of the most exciting tight ends I've ever seen.
Okay.
Moving on to defenses, let's talk to John about his favorite defenses of the week.
Yeah, there's nothing that really stands out. I think the chalk this week is going to be the Miami Dolphins, 2,900 going up against the Jets. We've already talked about all the reasons to hate the Jets and what they're bringing to the table. I wouldn't be surprised to see the Dolphins go off at 20% in terms of percent rostered, and they're not a very good defense. But that just goes to show you what people think about the Jets' offense. For GPPs, I got two defenses written down. Cincinnati Bengals against Indianapolis. I just talked about how poor I thought Phillip Rivers played last week. And Cincinnati Bengals, not a good defense, but they're only 2,100. I mean, they need to do almost nothing in order to reach value. On the higher ends, and I like Daniel Jones a little bit, but I think going against him with the Washington football team at 3,300 is interesting. They're Washington, they can get a pass rush on, and there's not a whole lot to like there in Giants lands. And as far as my numbers go, if I can pull it up quickly, I think I've got Washington as about the fifth defense on the board in terms of value, and I suspect they're going to be much, much, much lower than that in terms of GPP.
Devin, I saw you kind of nod your head a little bit there for that low-priced Bengals pick. Tell me more.
If I need to save salary, that's where I'm going. I'm really glad that Daniel Jones has one fan, and that's John Lee, because no Giants fans are fans of him. Pittsburgh Steelers, I think, are in a really good spot against Cleveland. Baker Mayfield, when he's under pressure, is a completely different quarterback than when he's not. We saw that in week 1 against Baltimore. When he throws the ball quickly, it never ends well. So I think that the Steelers have the highest upside of just about anyone on this slate this week.
Phil, who do you like at defense?
The only one that hasn't been mentioned is the Titans. I always like to get a piece of the defense playing Deshaun Watson. He holds on to the ball for too long, and he takes a lot of sacks. The Tennessee defense also isn't great. I mentioned that they give up a lot of points, even to bad teams or bad offenses like Minnesota and Jacksonville. But even in those high-scoring games, They're making enough plays. They've got at least 5 DraftKings points in their last 3, 2 interceptions, I believe, in each of their last 3, and eventually those are going to turn into a defensive touchdown if they keep forcing turnovers. So I don't mind them against Watson.
John, we're going to go to stacks next. I want to hear who you stacking this week. We led off the show with some game stack ideas. Maybe you can even talk about like the guy you're running it back with on the the other side of the stacks in the games you like.
Yeah, that's what I've got. I've got a lot of game stacks this week in terms of what I've written down. I'm going to go with Devin on one of them, believe it or not. Gardner Minshew to Laviska Shenault, and then running it back with, then I'm going to go opposite him and run it back with Kenny Golladay. So maybe he doesn't like that as much. But that's one I really like going into Thursday night. And then, and I've got 5 written down, so I want to give you 2. How about complete Miami Dolphins team stack? So I want Fitzmagic. I'm going to take Myles Gaskin, and then take your pick. And I like them both kind of equally. That's why they're both here. Either Devontae Parker or Preston Williams. So you've got basically you're getting 75% of the Miami Dolphins offense, and they're slated to score 28 points. And then run that back with Jeff Smith on the other side, who I think we all kind of like as a punt play, $3,000. And by the way, that's a super cheap game stack. You can really then load up with guys like Mattison, Derrick Henry. You can get an expensive tight end, Mark Andrews. There's a lot of ways to go with that one. And I think it's a really high upside stack at a cheap price.
Phil, who you stacking this week?
Yeah, I think John had some good ones there. I wouldn't mind in the Detroit-Jacksonville game doing something like Stafford, Golladay, Hawkinson, run it back with Shenault or Robinson at running back. So I'm going to be looking for creative ways to stack that game. And then I don't know, even though some people are probably going to play Newton by the end of the week, I don't know if they're going to be looking to stack him as much. And I think that Edelman is interesting. They were using Edelman, or Newton was anyway, as a downfield target, 12.5 ADOT, which is way, way, way deeper than he's usually targeted. That indicates to me that there's an opening there for big plays. So I like Newton Edelman. I don't mind Newton Harry. I think he could one of these days get a couple of scores. The problem there is the run back. So I guess if Fant plays, I said I liked Fant. Otherwise, I mean, who is Denver running out at receiver these days? Is like Tim Patrick their wide receiver one?
It's not pretty.
Yeah, so exactly. Noah Fant kind of needs to play to make that work.
Devin, who you stacking this week?
Super cheap. Joe Flacco, Jeff Smith, Myles Gaskin, load up everywhere else. Just hope they get behind. Gaskin puts in 2 touchdowns, and Flacco has to throw the entire game. Even a pick six wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if he threw one of those two.
If I won the Millie Maker with a Joe Flacco stack, I don't even know if I could bring myself to like be happy about it. That is horrendous.
I could do that.
Trust me, he was making $30 million a year, and he was pretty happy about doing that. So,
man. So yeah, why don't you give this video a thumbs up for the other 3 of us who don't like that call?
It's not the worst call I've ever had, but it's certainly not the best. Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams, we haven't mentioned that game as a whole the entire show. I don't think it's going to be as high of scoring as Vegas does. I think that both these defenses are pretty good, but there's a chance that it could shoot out.
Yeah, I think both of those guys kind of being a little bit under the radar. They're coming off of their bye week. That could be, kind of like a safe stack, even though it's a pretty pricey stack. I don't know that it's going to have a whole lot of roster percentage behind it.
I think Davante Adams will be interesting for what it's worth. At percent rostered, he's going to be 8,000, which might be or is the most expensive player on the slate. Recency bias, he hasn't done anything, obviously, because he's been injured, coming off the bye week. You've got expensive running backs that we've talked about that are going to be super popular. The leverage play there might be to go heavy on Davante Adams and then go cheap at running back and diversify, but differentiate your roster that way. So that's a sneaky just game strategy move for large field GPPs.
Yeah, he is the priciest receiver both at FanDuel and at DraftKings.
If you go Joe Flacco, you can fit expensive running backs and Davante Adams.
That's all the time we have for our show tonight. Check out all of our content at footballguys.com. We'll be back next Friday with our Week 7 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Phil Alexander, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com/DFS by clicking the button in front of Devin's face. And if you'd like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to press the button that's on Phil's face. And if you want to see our latest video, click that giant box that's in front of John Lee's face. Check all that stuff out. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.